Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Modern Day Musician. I am here today with one of my best friends in the world, incredible guitarist, William Earley. What's going on, Will?
Mr. Tuohy, how we doing? Everybody out there at home, how we doing?
Doing good, man. Some of this is going to be kind of like we do on our regular phone calls, I would imagine, but we're going to talk a lot about just being a modern musician and your experience. But before we get let's let it roam, and wherever it may go, like the Metallica song said. So you want to give just a little sort of background and talk about the kind of music that you play and things that you do as a musician in 2024.
Oh, the music that I play and the things that I do pay the bills. Uh,
Yeah, no.
no, well, I try to do as much creative stuff as I can, and I'm also been into this recent for the past couple years, as you know, just trying to deepen my harmony and further myself as a musician, which is really more of like I don't know, it's like the reason I got into it in the first place. You're kids, you get excited about something, and then you do that. That's why we all ended up in bands, and I've really tried to maintain that energy. So in this particular, well, 2024, I tried to mainly play with original projects. I was in a lucky enough situation where I didn't need to do the function band. Um, so I got to go do a couple seasonal tours, not consistent every day, but from spring through fall, play with an original artist, and that was a ton of fun. They were definitely not like super high paying gigs, but does it pay more than like teaching lessons for like an after school, like a box of rock or something? Definitely. Um, and other than that, I still have the Hot Club of Black Rock, which we played a ton.
Yep, Hot Club of
Music that
Black Rock. Check them out online, everybody.
check us out. There's so many of us.
You would classify that as a sort of a Django Reinhardt tribute type band, right? Is that accurate?
Yes, it's definitely a Django Reinhardt tribute, but it's not what I'd call. I think we've grown past the trying to sound authentic. We definitely have our own vibe. I think
Okay,
Django would like us.
cool.
Uh, as long as he didn't have to play against us, then he despise us. But no, it's just we're playing mostly Django tunes and swing music and kind of through performing music through his lens. But it's a chance for everybody to explore their different language and just have a blast. It's a great time to hang out. The equipment's light, it's honest. Uh, I love it. It's super fun.
Awesome. Okay, so you did that. You did playing as a sideman for a touring like an artist, right? And
Two this particular past year,
okay.
two that I was kind of contracted for.
And what about your solo album that you put out this year? Just give a little overview of that.
I blacked that out. So I did start. I put out a solo album back in the end of September 2023, and that was. I mean, those were tunes I wrote. I think like two of them when I was like 27, and they sat in purgatory in Pro Tools, just hiding out. And then the pandemic, I was like, wow, what a waste. And I'm bored. Let's do this. I put that out on the end of 2023. You can check it out, the Shadows EP. Uh, and so in 2024, I did start my own quartet. What do we call ourselves? I forgot already.
EDTC.
Um, EDTC, yeah, great group of players. Um, Early, Nick DeRico on drums, fantastic drummer. He drummed on that. He did all the drumming on the EP. Mike Tepper on bass. I play with Tepper all the time. He's the man. He's
Yeah.
available. Check him out. He's endorsed. And Joanna Collins, great keys player. Uh, and we spent a few months, I'd say like 4 months maybe, really getting a batch of original tunes together. And we were rehearsing pretty much weekly. And we did 4 shows, and it was super fun. We played the EP, which I never thought would actually be performed live just because the instrumentation is ridiculous. There's the first track I gave the engineer had 128 tracks. So
Well, and
nightmare.
you can tell it's very layered if you listen to it. There's a lot of different guitar layers and sounds and pads and parts and stuff. You really took the composition on that into a place that is not easily replicatable as is if you were to go do it live, right? You'd have to sort of start to parse out a lot of the layers, right?
There was a lot of omission. There was also a lot of I was using harmony um, effects on my TC pedal
Mm-hmm.
to try to replicate at least the fullness of those, because you're not going to do 5 guitar parts that were very specific or single note melodies, but you can kind of get in this similar area. And I think by the end of the run, they sounded really good. But unfortunately, as is the case, I think with trying to run an original band, everyone's schedules just weren't in line, and so we kind of put it to rest. And I kind of started a trio headed in a different direction, just based on really availability and um, prioritization.
Well, see, this is a perfect jumping off topic then. Okay, so literally in this year you have this project that you'd been working on during the pandemic, your solo album, your first one, right? I mean, you've played on other albums and stuff, but this was like this was your baby, your compositions, all that. You put together a band in the studio, you go to play some of the shows live, but then the ugly reality of being a musician in 2024 comes to bear, right? So we should talk about that. So you just said that, for instance, everyone's sort of availability starts to become scattered, very hard to put together. And then when you try to do an original project, especially what would you call a non-commercial product, this isn't a pop band, this is you're playing instrumental music, deep instrumental music, original compositions, you're not doing covers, and that part we should talk about is the practicality of trying to do that in 2024, and how do you actually, like, what are your calculations for things like that? I mean, is it the people that you're playing with, or is it like, look, I have to get paid a certain amount to do your gig, or is it like, I'll take your gig, but something, a wedding gig came up, and now I'm making $600 and I can't do you, like, how do you, what's your sort of what's your read of sort of the, let's call it the working musician versus what you're trying to do with your original music?
Oh, okay. I think there's layers to that. I think from a working perspective, with any band that's doing original music, I think the goal of the group is kind of what guides the whole thing. If you're getting together with a group of musicians where you're great friends, you guys love to play together, and you're starting a band, and your mission statement is like, hey, we want to play some of these original tunes locally whenever we get a chance, then cool. That's really easy to make happen. If your goal is to, like, okay, we want to bring this to like a career, a level of sustainability, we'd like to do regional tours, maybe tour Europe. Isn't that a crazy idea? I'd love to do that. But if your mission statement is to do something that's more intense, then it's more difficult to work with folks who can't commit the amount of time or don't have a similar agenda. So I think it's important. Really, that's a question of one: are the people you're working with on an original project aligned in their goals?
Mm.
Uh, in my particular case, because I was like, oh, I have like a 2 to 5 year plan. Like, let's get the tunes, let's get it worked out, let's start doing regional stuff and see if we can take it to, basically a medium sized club circuit, like a 2 to 500 room thing in a couple years. Uh, but I was playing with somebody or several people who was more of like oh, well, I got a job offer, I have to take this. And because the prioritization level was low and availability, it changed when one of the members was like, I'm only going to be available to play one weekend out of the month, and it can only be 1 or 2 days. It's like, okay, no.
Right.
Like,
Okay. Well,
no,
so here's a conundrum. So in this is a conundrum I've thought about in a way. When part of the thing about being a professional musician is that you work with people who are also professional musicians, who make their income and spend their time doing music in that way. But especially nowadays, that almost makes it 10 times harder working with people like that, such as probably ourselves too, because in order to make a living, you have to do the things, you have to play things that are, like you said, a function band, or you get a gig, or you're in you're a sideman in an original band that actually is touring and doing whatever it is that you have to go and do. So do you think, I've been tossing this around a little bit, do you actually think it's easier if you're the professional musician, say, and the other people in the band actually are 9-to-5ers, or they have sort of a more traditional job, so they know exactly when they're going to be free, they can plan ahead, there's nothing that they take as another gig, say, on top, because they have their steady salary, they have, like, what are your thoughts on that?
So in 2025, I'm going to be in a project that actually is more akin to what you were just describing. But I think there's a lot of details in there that really can affect the success of a project like that. If you have, say, you have a 9-to-5er who's, like, a good player, but their job is serious and they can't miss a lot of work, then that's really going to limit once again, your ability to do a lot of work with the group.
To go out and play, like to actually go and do, play the circuit like you're talking about.
Yeah, if you're gonna be playing in a group that's gonna be performing, say, like weekends, right? Even just regionally, you're talking every Thursday through Sunday. That starts to become difficult if you need to be, or even Friday through Sunday, if you need to be at a load in 3 hours away at 3:30 or 4 o'clock on a Friday, and you have a 9-to-5, you're not going to be able to take off 6 months of Fridays.
Right. So there's the other side of it, right? But then, or you get all the professional musicians and they're all taking whatever, understandably, I have this gig that pays me $300. I got to go do it, as opposed to an original gig, which is going to pay me $50 in tips or whatever it ends up being, right? That's the conundrum. So, like, how do you, part of the way to get through it, I guess, is, well, I guess we're not doing this right now. That's one way. But how do you find, you said you're going to be doing some trio stuff this, condensing the band, because even on a practical level, 3 people's schedules is easier to juggle than 4, right? It gets exponentially more difficult. Is that one of the things you've sort of landed on as, like, this is how, especially if you're going to want to do original music of some stripe, is that how you sort of landed on get the least amount of people to make the music sound good and also be able to schedule it, or is that how you're thinking? Or
no, there was a bunch of different factors. I think one was availability, like I'm getting to work with. So the trio that I am working, which is it's going to be a slow burn for sure. I would imagine 6 months to a year before we start releasing material. But I get to play with drummer Justin Howland, who was in a bunch of my old groups, Mas Opus. We did Hot Chaos together. I've been playing with him since high school. Great drummer, but he doesn't play in any other groups. So
right, that's
right
helpful.
away,
right,
his focus is like, oh, I want to do this and put my energy into this.
Yeah.
Here's what my availability is.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, great. I have 2 other projects that take kind of first place in priority in this coming year. So I was like, well, this is great. We can work on this singular thing together over time. And when it's ready, we can do whatever we want with it. Also, the search for keyboard players has been difficult. I have played with them for so long, and when I was younger, became really reliant on constantly having those textures. But at this point, a lot of times I'm just like, you guys have too many fingers. Or like, I almost want to like unplug half the keyboard when they're not there. So like, oh, my bass notes don't work. Whoops.
Yeah,
but it's been really freeing, and I feel like it's actually pushing my role in the group into an entirely different spot. I can play more than single notes without causing dysfunction.
Yeah.
And that's had a major impact on the gear I use. So as opposed to just going in with a really standard, like, guitar tone, blues, jazz, rock, country, whatever, usable sounds, gain staging that'll get me through a gig, Instead, I'm running a board where it's like, okay, I am running a synthesizer through a separate amplifier and a guitar rig that has a bonkers amounts of possibilities, a lot of different like analog fuzzy synth or total synth sounds. So I'm kind of doing some sound design, which when there's a keyboard player, I don't need to do that because they have access to these giant pads. So it's like, oh, you make the cool sounds, and I'll just bibbity boop on top. But this time it's gotten me more involved in that other aspect, which is really cool.
So you find that so it sort of becomes a necessity because finding a keyboard player that matches maybe with your music is a tough challenge when they're the visions have to align, which is hard, right? And then but there's also like, oh, maybe I can explore sounds using guitar in a different way. And I know you have like a really elaborate pedalboard setup, right? Don't you want to just for the guitar geeks out there, you want to describe in brief how you do that with your stuff?
Sure, I can. Maybe I'll send you a picture.
Okay, yeah, I'll pop it up. Yeah, nice editing. I'm editing right now.
Yes, do that editing. So the board I have is when the guitar input goes in, it's split, and one of those splits goes into a Boss SY 300. Yeah, the one with the 4 buttons, and that has a dedicated output that will go into either the house or an amplifier. And then I'm using like kind of like a really basic controller. It's that Boss MS3. I got it used for like $200. Most of my stuff is used. I don't really buy it new because I'm going to work it and it's going to be immediately used. But that goes out through like 7-ish analog pedals, and then what did I just have to put on my board? Oh, the Line 6 HX1. I used to have the M5. Great pedal, super cool. Was too big to fit on the board. I had to buy the HX1 to save an inch so the MIDI cable could actually fit. And that goes through like a little Morningstar thing that lets me route the pedals into. I'm using a floor pedal amp on this rig, the Black Star Amped 2, which I got for like $325, which I love that. And it sounds great. And the cool thing with that particular rig is that with the use of the MIDI controller, everything switches via MIDI. It does 4 MIDI channels. So everything is clocked to a single tap tempo. So like if I launch synth arpeggiators, they'll be in time with my delays or my freezes or my trems, whatever I throw on. And at the very edge of the board, right on the corner, is one additional out. So if I want, with a drummer, if they're going to, especially in the trio, if he's going to use like a Roland pad or something, his samples or sequences will run off of my clock as well. So whatever I tap tempo will sync up all of his stuff with all of my stuff, which is kind of like a really analog and risky way to make a trio sound like there's more layers. If I'm running arpeggiators or synth pads and he's running sequences, and now it sounds like there's 5 of us instead of 3 of us. So it allows me to venture into that realm.
All right. So question. All right.
Yeah.
So let's get controversial.
Oh.
Why not put that on a backing track and play along, have your drummer trigger all that stuff in a sequence that's already recorded, leaving your hands free for doing the whatever the main parts or the melody parts or whatever you're doing at the time. What's the why choose that?
So the most basic reason why is because if you're an unknown trio and you're doing opening slots for larger groups and you have a 10-minute setup time,
practicality, right, okay,
yeah,
yep.
Having cables run around the stage, making sure that your whatever DAW or program you're running live is synced over Wi-Fi or whatever. It's just there's a lot of X factors that can go wrong and a lot of additional setup time.
Yep.
Because I have experimented with that. I have like a mini Wi-Fi router that is portable that'll link up using Ableton Live, sync everything.
And if you have no
also
sound
kind of fun
check,
when you're responsible, because you have to it's a different part of the performance art. Like if you are launching these things,
yep,
then it'll sound a certain way because of the necessity of your involvement. So,
well, this is funny because talk to Mark Fossarelli, my, Mark from
Yes.
MMZ, of course, you know him. And a lot of his choices, he said too, are like practical choices. Well, I would love to be able to, he even said, he's like, I'd love to be able to use, bring a real organ and a real piano and some of these other things. He goes, but when we're opening for other groups, he goes, I can't, it's like, I plugins sound really good, and also they're much more practical. If it was our show, if you have all the time in the world to set up and sound check, if you can make sure everything's good, sure, I'd love to do it a particular way. But the truth is, like you just said, I have no bandwidth or time to, you got to be able to plug your board in, get on stage, get a quick line check and go, right? So the practicality sort of wins out over any sort of philosophical, thing. And I think this is also, but I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I also feel like the type of music that you like playing has a lot of sort of group dynamic, improvisational elements. It's not sort of a set thing where it's like everyone plays their parts exactly as is on the record or whatever. So does that play into this sort of thing where you're like, well, I'm going to keep it organic. I will trigger the synths. If I miss the pedal, oh well, nothing is going to happen, right? Or like, is that sort of how you think about that, or is there an aesthetic sort of sense, or?
Not necessarily. I do try to set up, because in improvisational scenarios, we always tend to play the way we hear, and so if you're really used to a sound, you kind of play to that. It's kind of like, you throw on raging like Boston distortion, you know what you're going to start playing. And it's definitely not going to be like really beautiful open chords with open strings. You're going to rip some shit.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing if you put on a clean tone, like a super clean, no mid-range thing, you're probably going to play a different way. So I kind of set up with tunes some of the tunes we write, the different improvisational sections, I'll throw on a sound like a synthesizer in one song, maybe like a really airy thing. And I have to play different because of that. So it kind of attenuates my choices in a way. And then in a different song, I have one where there's like an organ sound under my foot. And whenever I hold a button, it'll freeze that particular note. And I play way different on that because it's like organs tends to be a more rhythmic, choppy, eating up a ton of frequency kind of sound. So the guitar sound I'm using in that section has to complement that. Like I'm using an organ sound out of the sound out of the synth. I'm not going to use a clean guitar. It'll disappear in the mix. So I have to use more of a gainy thing. So during that whole section, I'm not really playing if I'm improvising in that kind of funky blues rock, like really C+ level Osnoy. If I'm in that mode, I'm not going to be playing big voicings. Like maybe, a couple little dyads, freeze a root note, play some single note lines. Very different than if you have this ethereal kind of synth pad. You're going to play a lot of voicings and use a clean guitar, shimmer, and that kind of stuff. So in that case, yeah, it absolutely influences what I'm going to play. And I'm also hoping we'll do a couple things for the listener. I'm hoping that one, playing completely different things will keep their attention, and I won't, because either that or I'll take the same solo all night, Hot Club of Black Rock. Or I'm also hoping it'll kind of filter this modern age's ADD, essentially. Like we all grew up with like fast moving shows, constant change of color. I think sometimes going to see like a live, say, jazz trio, you can get kind of bored of the sound of it because it sounds the same the entire time.
Especially as a listener who's maybe not familiar with the style, right? You're in a club with some friends, and it sounds sonically like homogenous, and you're saying that like I would love someone to come in who doesn't know me, doesn't know my music, but whoa, that's a cool sound. What's that? Oh, there's like a synth thing. Oh, there's a thing. Like, so you kind of get you get textural shifts essentially by the gear that you're using. Is that fair to say?
Can I use that as the album name? Textural shifts?
Yeah, sure. Fine. I just want 10%. So it's on record.
Yeah. I'm going to call it textural miss and give you nothing.
Oh, man. Man, how's that happen?
But yeah, that's the idea, is to use different timbres so that non-specific listeners, like somebody who's not a guitar player who doesn't care might be like, oh, that's a dope beat, I really like that sound. And then hopefully keep some attention throughout the course of the night.
Yeah.
Whereas opposed to like some older school cats, like I'll reference when you and I went and saw that incredible Schofield trio at Blue Note.
Oh yeah, amazing.
Dude, they do a great job of, in that kind of scenario where it's like he's playing guitar, it sounds amazing, but they do feel shifts. Like one song will be a blues, the next song will be a ballad, the next song will be funky. Like they shift it up to keep a person's attention.
Right. Because they're not dealing with a huge sonic palette. It is what it is, and so they have to dynamically too. They were amazing. You know, really. Yeah, that was one of the best. Was that a year ago? We saw that more than that, 2 years ago.
Yeah, I think it was a year. It might have been a year.
I think a year ago. Yeah.
2023.
Yeah, man. Oh man, that was amazing. All right, I love this. So let's talk about some things that that are related to sort of. So you were talking, you talked about sort of your philosophy, for your groups. We talked about your sort of the type of groups that you play with as a sideman, all that stuff, and your solo projects. Other things that you do as, let's call them, income generating musical things. So you have also taught guitar for a really long time. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that, how does that fit in your sort of overall picture of a career? How important is it, and what is your, do you have a particular teaching philosophy?
Ooh, that's a good question. That's
a lot of question. That's a lot of questions. Sorry.
No, but that last part, I think I do. I think it grows. Yes, I'm fortunate that I've been, teaching for a long time as kind of like a dummy jam band rock guy. Getting an opportunity to teach for a living was awesome. And I think it's part of the cycle of mastery. I think through teaching and verbalizing and kind of guiding younger or just other folks through an art form or discipline like this, you yourself grow. I know for me, I've been working because I taught at a bunch of different places privately, and then I started teaching at the School of Rock in Fairfield 13 years ago, which is a really long time.
Wow.
And I never wanted to be a full-time teacher. My goal has always been to perform original music that I'm into, and that's still the goal. We're still doing that. But so functionally, a job like that has been wonderful for me because anytime I need off, as long as I give them advance, it's part of their structure there, is you don't have to worry about any of the stuff that if I wanted to become a full-time guitar teacher, like if I was teaching privately and I was like, oh my God, I got to pay for hypothetical kids to go to college, I would just full-time teach privately, and that would be the extent of my aspirations. And it would financially put me in a couple brackets up. There's no question. But with this, I teach 4 days a week now. And the wonderful part is it's a great community and environment to be in, young musicians. And the flexibility is what's great. My girlfriend and I did a 3-week duo tour this past November, and I was able to leave for 3 weeks. Now, it wasn't PTO, it's not paid.
Right.
But if I have another opportunity to do a 2-week tour in January, they'll let me go. So there's a good array of subs, and it's really allowed me to pursue the performance thing, because in the summertime I take off. I'm gone a ton, as are a lot of other great local working musicians who play in bands are like, hey, I got to go on a 3-week run. I'm out of here. So
the flexibility aspect is paramount.
The flexibility and the consistency. It's like, as long as my baseline is covered, it allows me to explore creative avenues. And that's kind of what I've always done, is rather than put the focus on like a financial gain, I've always put my focus for the past 13 years on artistic growth and commitment to good times and music. So that's essentially that. I flirt on and off with teaching privately, but also after you've been teaching for as long as I have, you start to get burnt out a little. I want to do other stuff.
Yeah.
So I don't really want to take on additional. But for the teaching methodology, I have Yes, I do have a methodology, which is pretty much just, it's the same. Actually, you know what? I probably stole it from Victor Wooten at some point. If you read his book, The Music Lesson, which is Trip. I don't think it's real, but it's Trip. It's great. It's worth a read. Uh, but I like to treat it like little kids learning to talk, because that's essentially what it is. It's learning another language. Um, and I truly believe it's the same way where, like, you know, most people, like, I'll ask you, how old were you when you were a functionally able to hold conversations?
It's a good question. Probably 5 or 6.
Cool. Cool. How old were you when you started to learn to read?
I'm not a good example because I learned to read around 2.5.
So you could
3.
read before you could speak?
Well, I could speak, but not like long paragraphs and stuff. But I learned, yeah. I'm not the typical. I have like if you when you come over, if you come over around Christmas, you can talk to my family about how they realized I could read really early because I was reading signs and all these things. And they're like, what?
But, but it's wild that, like, you might be the only instance of this I've ever known where
I
somebody could actually read before they could speak
I mean,
words.
no, I could speak words, but I wasn't like able to like hold like a conversation like this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So
Would you say it was more like you could say like mom and dad or cup, but you could also read like stop, like you knew the visual intent of that?
yeah, I could actually read the
Yeah.
letters though. I'm a terrible example of what you're trying to what you're trying to do.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
Um, no, that's actually really interesting. I'd love to actually dive deeper into that to see if it's like a memory allocation thing where you're like, oh, this red sign
No,
means stop, or if you actually knew the individual letters.
well, maybe we'll cut this out of the podcast because it might be boring. But my grandfather was a child psychologist out of the University of Fairfield, and
Oh,
he recognized that I could read very early, and he was like, he thought it was just sign recognition, like you're talking about, and he said he was like, oh yeah, like because I said I forget the exact story, but it was like, oh, he's like, oh, we need to get gas. I was maybe about 3 years old, and I was like, oh, there's a Sunoco right there, and he goes, how do you know that, John? And I was like, I don't know, I read it. He goes, no, what's that say? Shell. What's that say? And he started pointing to different things, stuff that didn't have necessarily like a logo or whatever.
yeah.
So that's my weird freak upbringing.
Well, for the audience, one of John Tuohy, aka Mr. Digital, aka John the Reader.
John the Reader. That's right. Yeah, that's a super inside joke.
But still, in that moment, you answered with words. Like, you could already talk. You could say like, "Oh, there's a Sunoco."
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um. Well, this is super cool. I don't cut this. This is great.
Okay.
But no, I do think in most cases, like when most children just learn to start talking because their parents are like jamming around them, like
Mm-hmm.
saying things, mama, dada, eventually they pick up, and it's super frustrating, right? When you're a baby, you're crying because you have no idea how to answer back. And I kind of do that to my students. I just make them cry. I torment them. I play on top of them. No, no. But I like to do a lot of lead vocabulary where we'll take simple concepts that are the root of all stuff, say like a major triad. You know, it's every major scale or chord, dominant, whatever. They all use that base level triad.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll play that and I'll play melodies and they'll copy me. And I'll teach them some slang. Like, I'll show them how to do like a bluesy third on that. And then I'll play lines that incorporate that. And it kind of instills in a lot of students a very natural understanding of what that tonality actually sounds like. For the kids I've worked with who, like, even take it semi-serious, if they hear a major 7 chord, there is no like, hey, what are you playing? They're like, oh, it's that thing, and they just do it. Same thing with, like, if they hear like a minor chord, they just instant auto recall know what to play on top of that, even if it's like just a minor pentatonic or maybe something more advanced. But that methodology, I think, one of kind of call and response, really ingrains it in the ear, and it's more like just tossing lingo back and forth, and lingo sticks. The other methodology that I've been really into for the past year, it's actually what I'm working on for my book, which will come out one day, but is just a different perspective on how to look inside of scale studies to foster exploration. So introducing, like with a 7-note scale, like any scale, say the major scale, I'll kind of like, yeah, they got to learn the major scale. That's important. But for those students that do want to get into improvisation or composition, um, even just like creating like rhythmic parts, it's like, okay, cool, that's the major scale. Let's look at a different way to like tackle 2-note systems. Like, how do we look at dyads? How do we look at polyphony? How do we look at intervals? And then we'll jump and we'll be like, okay, let's look at 3-note systems. Like, what is a triad? What are all the color tones that are not in the triad? How do we take advantage of that in arpeggios? What's a chord scale? How do we use chord scales to our advantage? Because like you have all these diatonic chords, but you can't just play them. So that's where injecting as many concepts for playing at an early age, hoping that some of them stick. Because I feel like once you're aware of something, then you can ask more about it later on. I think one of the most difficult things for a student of anything is to ask questions when you don't even know that those components exist. I know I struggled with that
Yeah.
forever because I was given a scale and through I was very fortunate to have so many teachers, but somehow they all never really gave me a concise instruction on like, oh, here's ways to be creative. Maybe make interval combinations. Like, can you go through a Dorian scale, fourth, sixth, alternating, fourth, sixth, fourth, sixth, fourth, sixth, keep the melody. You can do that with any interval combination. If I had known that 30 years ago,
Mm.
who knows what I'd be like right now? Maybe I'd have a nicer shirt.
Do you find that a lot of your early instruction teachers for you didn't connect the dots in a way that you learn best, or maybe they, are you saying they assumed a lot of things about, here's a scale, and you're like, well, great, I have no idea how to use, like what was the thing that was missing for you to make those kind of connections, or to be able to unleash the creative aspect like you're talking about?
So if I look back to a lot of my early instruction with great players, but I think there is a big difference between great players and great teachers. I think it was a combination of complete lack of instruction and also myself being a poor student. I think the saving grace was that I did want to be creative. Uh, we both had the same teacher in high school, and I know you got a ton out of him because you were
Shout out
killing him.
Steve Famigletti.
Uh, but he kind of just like, when I look back at it, he just like gave me, he's like, oh, these are the major scales, learn them. There's really only 2 chords. I was like, what does that mean? But it never showed me like, hey, this is a major arpeggio. Hey, these are what neighbor tones are. This is what a bluesy third is. This is what makes a 4-note chord. If you add the 6th, you have a major 6, which is the root of your R&B, your blues, your major triad extension. This is what the 7th does to it. These are the notes that sound really harsh against it. There was never like that kind of thing. It was just like, oh, here's the thing, you can play it over all these chords. Which, yeah, but nah. Yeah, but nah. Um, but there was, but I would take that scale and then play for hours. I just like put on a Sublime record and be like, why does this work sometimes? And sometimes it doesn't. And you just trust in your ear,
Mm.
which is great ear training in its sense. But then sometimes if there was a modulation, I'd be like, what?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
What's going on?
So some of the way, it might have been the way that it was approached. It might have been also the way that you were able to process the information too, right? At the time, we're going back all those years, and like, for some reason it was incomplete in a way that showed you the application in real world scenarios. Is that kind of what you're saying? Like the application was off, like the theory was there, the content was there, but the content didn't have as much meaning for you because it didn't show itself as easily in real world situations. And here's how it works in this song or this style, and this is, is that what it is? Or
Yeah, I think a combination of that and just like I was saying before, like really basic walkthroughs, like, hey, let's play on a G major chord, play what I play. Let's talk about like why if you land on the 4, it doesn't sound good. Like when nobody actually goes through and kind of explains some of that more, it's not explained theory like it's a law, but it's like these occurrences happen and we built this whole man-made music system to communicate ideas to each other. But you still have to explain like, okay, well, do you hear how the four sounds against a third in a major chord? It's very clashy. If that's not the sound you want or that's appropriate for the song, you don't want to put that on a downbeat because we tend to hear that strong. Like just those little bits of information make those toolkits open to very useful devices that have like infinite amounts of possibility. But if you're just like, but I wasn't given that. Instead, I was just like, oh, here's these scales, learn them, and I was just running them. And never, I mean, I never even put together that like, oh, major scale, major chord, they probably go together.
Okay.
Like that was even bypassed for me. It was like, oh, major scale works on a Dorian chord. Like, what does that even mean? Because it does, but that's not great for me.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I know that a lot of those dots were from what I remember, although it was forever ago, were given to me, and I didn't know how to use them. That was my problem, is that I understood that a fourth, say, on a major chord, on a major seventh chord, when you play it together, I was like, I know this doesn't sound good, and I know why, but I don't know how to not hit this as I'm just trying to rip a scale up and down or whatever, and I'm like the taste part of those things that you're talking about, the taste stuff, that took me personally quite a while to understand. Like, I got it. There's a big difference. This is a theme in my life, apparently, which is I understand something on an intellectual level, then to actually apply that understanding in a way that makes sense in totality that has taken me forever. I'll understand something way before I can actually do the thing and feel what it means to. Oh, right. That fourth clashes because it's a half step higher than the third. It also creates a tritone with which is a very dissonant interval with the seventh. So that's why when I do that, I feel weird when I hit that. And I'm like, that didn't sound right. Okay, now I have to figure out a way. Now, next step, now I have to figure out a way to play whatever I was playing, but make sure that I avoid that. But how, and it's like a multi-layered problem there. And then eventually we get to experience it, in a way, you figure it out, like you said, sort of trial and error. And for me, it was just like hitting my head against the wall for a long time,
So I think that's the interesting part, is that, and I wonder if the newer generation has a much better time with it because there's so much information available. But I feel like that's guided application.
Guided application
for us at a super early age. If it's like, okay, cool, let's play over this sound with this, because then you kind of are guided on your experience of it. And the same way that your parents are like, that's a bad word, don't use it. If your teacher's like, okay, that word exists, but don't use that right here, and you understand it in a very fundamental and language like human level.
Yeah, I like that, and that's one of the things that you try to do, to emphasize in your teaching, right? I mean, that's you're like, here's how to use it. Here's a scenario. Let's use this. So you get it in your bones, sort of, right?
Yeah, and fortunately, because I'm teaching at a rock school, it's what I've been doing that works really well. Is everything I do is kind of in a performance scenario. So it's like when I teach these things, it's like, oh, you can put your fingers on the guitar. Cool. Let's put on this groove, and we're going to play these ideas in time, because groove, no matter if you play the right notes, if they're in the wrong spot, it never sounds great. And I think focus on that aspect just causes natural growth, because it's kind of like being automatically at the gym the whole time. You're playing in time, then you develop a knack for it. It's kind of like, I always remember you said when we went to college the first year, you're like freshman year, you describe all the rhythms. It's like, this is a 1-EM. There's a push on this. And then by the time you're a senior, you're just like, oh, can you do that? And everybody just gets it.
Right.
It instills that into you. It's like an understanding of the fundamentals, but really it just becomes part of your nature, your musical nature.
That's awesome. All right, so I have a couple questions for you. I've kind of always wanted to ask you this, and this is a perfect scenario. I love that zoom in thing that your camera's doing. Oh, there it is. Oh no, I love it. You look scared about the question I'm going to ask you. If you had to pick what you think is probably your strongest, let's say, natural skill, and what is one that you have had to improve by years of practice? What's something that you feel like you kind of came out of the gate? If you're playing an RPG, you that's already at level 10 when you're making your character, right? Like, and which one was at level 1 and you've had to sort of work on it to get it up to where it is?
So part creation was what I came right because, and I think that's anything you do as a kid just develops the most over time because it naturally has the most time to grow.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole reason I play music is because my best friends were in bands and playing guitar, and for some reason we were like didn't want to learn any other people's stuff. We were writing songs together because it was just, I don't know, what was it, 1995 or something? Like we were 12, 13. Like I played Smells Like Teen Spirit at the 8th grade talent show.
I remember.
That was like, yeah, it was the first time I performed anything. But after that, we just wrote our own songs.
Yeah.
And it was, we had a punk first, whatever our 8th grade bands were funny because it was like, God, what were we called? Hate Ball was one of them or something, or God, we had such a dumb name. But like we were writing either punk songs or rock songs, or just like, oh, check out this riff. And then that transformed. I did have a punk band, which was great. We wrote 3 songs that were way too good for us. And then immediately got kicked out of like our friend's parents' basement.
It happens.
Yeah, I remember friend Adam Krell wrote this song called Violin Song. It was so good. It was like all these cool little like power chords because that's all we.
Shout out Krell.
Yeah, but like my friend who was in Mas Opus with me for 10 years, like Brian Fox, we would just write songs together at his house, which was mostly just like we'd write a riff, he'd sing something over it. Being with another creative type made that process, because I was never a singer. So every time he'd be singing something, I'd be trying to like, oh, well, this work. Could we do this? Pepper Jives, that band, we wrote a ton of tunes. So now that I'm older and have learned a bunch of other stuff, that's usually the thing that I actually probably have the best knack for.
Yeah, part creation.
And when I end up in improvisational situations, what I don't do is try to go in and blow notes. I try to, what do we call it, spontaneously compose a part and loop that so everybody can gravitate towards it.
Okay, so part creation, because you've had a lot of experience and you just felt like naturally like that's sort of your wheelhouse. Okay, what's something that you've had to work on? What's something that you've had to...
my ears suck.
Really?
It's been, so in that same regard, as I was just talking before, like my methodology for teaching, I never had that. So like I wasn't able to hear any chord changes because I wasn't learning songs. I didn't learn popular music. I didn't learn jazz. I learned like chord shapes, jazz, your your basic 7th chords, which don't even sound like jazz anymore. But I would learn those and then try to write songs with them or apply them to like our jam band as I was getting closer to getting out of high school and college years. And when I did get a job at the rock school, my whole job is transcription. So, and I've also, since done so many different kinds of music, but that's something that I started way later in life. And so now my ears developed, and if I'm much more than it was. And I do notice, like, if I do my John McLaughlin 45 minutes in the morning warm-up routine, and I really let like the tones hit my body, my ear will be great. And lately it's like, oh, I'll go right to the right note. I have my mushroom coffee blend in the morning. It's like instantaneous. But if I'm not warmed up, like I'll miss like a flat 7 chord. I'll be like, what was that? Like, so that's what I struggle with the most. And I think the way to do it is to spend more time practicing harmony, and you get used to it, and then it just pops out. But yeah, that'll cause me confusion from time to time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like in that video game analogy, which maybe has been done to death, I don't know. I feel like there's there's some innate ability that you have in one of the 3 major sectors of music. Some people are born, like some of my good friends, kind of starting at a 7 on all of those, and then they practice, so I mean, it varies, right? But certain things just become you gravitate towards them and you have a knack for them immediately, like you said. And some things, you know, it takes some work. And there is some people who just don't ever work on the other stuff, and they work on getting their natural 8 to a 10, and that becomes the thing that they do, and they do that thing better than anybody else. I find that I guess my philosophy has always been to try to even out my stats, if that makes sense. So like, if I'm pretty good here and not good here, it's like I work on the thing that I'm not good to get up to the level of where my other stat is, or, you know. So I find that really interesting. And also the consequence of where you're strong can end up leading you towards a particular type of music or a way of doing things. Like, you're great at writing parts. You naturally come up with these ideas. That's something that you can you gravitate towards. You have a knack for, like you said. So therefore, original music, being a part of a band, doing these like these kind of things would sort of become dominant to you. Whereas, let's say someone who just can read music phenomenally, just understands the math from an early age, and just gets it, might gravitate towards the work that, like, okay, put anything in front of me, I can play it. I know people like that who just, I mean, they're at a 10 from the beginning on that skill, and maybe their rhythm isn't great, or you know, and so they, if they want to, they have to sort of, you know, ratchet that up or whatever. I just find it interesting, I guess.
So you use the RPG analogy, and I've been big on that for a while now, and I've actually been telling some of my students that, because it's true, man. What you work on, music's only two things. It's not even two. I don't know why I put that number there, but the time you put in is what you get out of it. And so one of the things we can control is what areas we want to develop.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times those areas are developed based on the reality of your situation. Uh, like you're a great example, because you've been doing this incredible band, Mile Marker Zero. You've been writing with these guys for so long. Your focus and attention has been in that area. Your understanding things that like would take me hours to even understand are just so much more natural. And your ability to play in that genre and move through those kind of ideas and everything that's associated with it grow exponentially. And like, since you've been doing all this uh, theater work, your ability to read, I'm sure, has come way up, because we talked about that for a while.
Yeah.
And so I've been thinking about that a lot. Is what are the areas, like, what do I want to do? Where do I want to end up? And so it's funny, like, not reckless abandon, but I have been trying to just spend all my time in different realms that are part of my world. So I've been doing a ton of like harmonic study to further those points, because like I don't get hired, I don't do a lot of like jazz things. I don't have a huge repertoire in that area, but I do end up in a lot of these improvisational situations or to write parts.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been those where I have more, through exploration, artillery for either of those things. If I end up in a studio thing and I have to write for a chord progression or a groove, I'm hoping that I'll have new things that just pop out because of the time I've been spending. So
Oh, that's
yeah, it's
awesome.
interesting how that
Yeah.
works.
No, it's cool. And sometimes it's a forcing function, you know. You get offered something, you're like, okay, well, you know, this is maybe not my perfect skill set, but I'll figure out how to make it work. And then, you know, you end up working on these skills that just, they level up at least a little bit or whatever. And it's like, oh, okay, well, all right. So I need to short, or you, in the worst case scenario, you get really embarrassed at something you got hired to do. And it's like, ooh, this is something I gotta work on, you know? And it also has to call for you.
Everything musically can lead you to an aspect of growth if you're open to it.
Yeah. If you're open to it.
If you're open to it. I had a huge one. I was playing with that artist. He just won New England Artist of the Year or something, but Frank Vielli. And I did a run with him, and we had one rehearsal, and I was like, wow, my tone is not appropriate for his music. He kind of does this heartland rock, kind of like harder Americana. And it set me through this whole tonal quest. And I learned so much about mid-range frequencies and different overdrive pedals and their response and what works for me, what doesn't, what works with my guitars. Like, I have a custom pedal, the palm drive that you actually have because it works better with your guitar than mine.
I love it.
But like that was, I feel like my tonal growth this year was exponential, but it was because I was playing in a genre where I was like, oh, my shit doesn't work on this.
So being forced, you're like, oh, well, I need to make this work. I have to figure out how this works with Frank's music. And so now you're being forced in a way to reconsider things. I guess that's a good thing, and I'm very much a believer of learning on the job. A lot of times there's a lot you can practice. There's a lot you can prepare for, but there's so many more things that you can't. So it just smacks you in the face. Like you're saying, you have a rehearsal. You're like, oop. Yep, this is not going to work. I gotta retool this. It wasn't, if you had thought about it before you went to the rehearsal, you could have probably maybe gotten there, but it's way easier to just be like in the situation, right?
I read, so there's this Joe Pass guitar book, and I read the first page, nothing else, but the first page there was this great line that just said, "These are all my ideas on how to advance a guitar." I'm paraphrasing because I don't know the exact line. "There is no teacher like the bandstand."
Yeah. Yep. Well, and that actually that dovetails perfectly into maybe our last little segment here before I let you go. Talking about sort of how different it is coming up as a musician now. It's that he's, back in Joe Pass's day, there was a lot of, if you wanted to play jazz, there were a lot of jazz clubs. You could go up on the bandstand and get your butt kicked by the rest of the musicians, and then you could come back the next week and you could go to the next town, and there was a lot more of those opportunities. And even when we were a bit younger, playing live was sort of like, you could find, and there certainly are plenty of places, but it's a different landscape now. And I find that a lot of my younger students, for instance, who have good ability and everything, they've never played a show. Many of them don't even have a desire to play live. They don't go see things. It's a different attitude. And do you think, but however, technically a lot of the times these students are way better than we were, because they can sit there, they can go take their lessons online or whatever. They can go on YouTube and they can sit there and gain incredible facility. But I'm wondering if you think that something, because I sort of feel this way, but feel free to disagree. I feel like something is lost if you don't have bandstand experience, like this X factor. How do you feel about that? Because you teach a lot of young kids. Luckily, in your program, it is based on performance, so they get a chance to do these things through the school, which is awesome. But what are your thoughts on that?
So oh man, I might just ramble for a second about this.
Yeah.
So the natural evolution of the human species is that each generation will have the opportunity to surpass the previous one because of information and access to resources. So there are going to be faster guitar players, more advanced guitar players. I mean, dude, I've worked with kids who at 17 were playing things I couldn't play until I was 28 physically.
Yeah.
This is also across the board. Like there's these incredible players from other countries, like these super young, high level kids, like Matteo Mancuso's incredible.
Oh yeah.
But still, you put him on stage with guys like Scott Henderson and Al Di Meola, who he sits in with, and they just have 50 years of experience he doesn't have. Language spacing is just, and he can get there. I think actually him working with those cats, once again, cycle of mastery, you learn from those examples. But not to derail. So I think that, yeah, with the advent of these resources, the newer generation is going to be way farther ahead in their playing than any previous generation. It's always going to work that way. I do think that there's a lot more hyper skilled musicians now than ever before in history, but I don't think there's going to be more actual listenable artists. I see it across multi-genre where it's like the amount of younger cats who can blow giant steps at 300, but play the most boring, asinine, never-ending run of lines. It's impressive from a physical standpoint, and that's what I'm seeing being mastered across genres. Like, oh, I can tap with all 10 of my fingers faster than Eddie Van Halen ever could have, or I can play all of this stuff absolutely perfect. But when it comes down to what music is about, which is intention and emotional output and connection through this medium, music, not the instrument. Music is about all of those things. And that's what you learn on the bandstand. When you play and you write, you perform, and you learn how to put your essence, or as Chick Corea says when he talks about melody, your personality into a space and have it work with others and inadvertently have that affect the audience. That is why we all love music. And it doesn't matter band or genre. For me, it's always been about just automatically feeling it. Like whether I listen to a Deftones tune or I listen to like this amazing Grant Green thing, it just hits you in a way that you automatically want to respond. When I hear these masters of craft who have dissected like I just watched a video because I took a mini lesson the other night, but who have dissected like bebop scale studies, how to make your bebop scale sound perfect, and then they can do that over every chord change like a robot. It's great. I'm going to incorporate some of that into my lines and use it in a way that is like drum fills for me. But like I was listening to it and I was like, this is so boring. It's really impressive, but I don't care about that when I listen to music.
So more craftsmen, incredible craftsmen, less artists is kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, but I think even those craftsmen will have a hard time, like because once again, you could be super good at that stuff, but unless stage, are you going to be able to express a way like Eddie Van Halen does, or the way that Hendrix did, or Clapton? You know, Clapton's like he's so expressive in his language. I doubt he knew half the things that most 20-year-old guitar players who are semi-professional know now.
I have a theory that you cannot be a slow guitar player and get any attention these days. I don't think you can play like, I mean, you know how amazing Clapton is, especially a lot of his live recordings, especially, you know, even when he was 24, 25, it's like, wow, like just the amount of expression, or you know, David Gilmour is always a paragon of that kind of playing. But that doesn't look good on Instagram, really, right? And that doesn't, you know, if Eric Clapton was now 25 years old and coming up and trying to make a name for himself, I almost think it would be a moot point because it doesn't show. The aesthetic is not flash. There's a lot of flash going on, which I love, and I do love flash. It just can't be 100% of what you're doing. There's a lot of flash going on now, but there's much less taste, I guess you could say.
So, and I think so that brings up a really interesting thing. So, like the Instagram model, which is it's flash. It's these really super functional players, and their career is now selling PDF packets and doing Instagram videos.
Hey, you know what though? Good for them for figuring out a way to capitalize on it. So there is that element, right?
A whole new industry is
Yep.
afoot. I know younger players who are dedicating all their time to creation of backing tracks right now.
Yep.
If I knew the channel, I'd drop the name right now. But Gianni Ledo, young great thing, their whole crew is working on generating backing tracks, and they're getting noticed for it.
Yep.
But the reality is like before, whatever you put your time into is what's going to be. These guys. Oh, I just lost my earbuds. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I got you. You're good.
All right, cool. So just to complete that thought, so to playing slow and not being noticed. So you have these really quick guitar players who are putting out these incredible PDF packages talking about everything from how to shred faster than anyone's ever been able to, or how to bebop harder than anyone. Then you also have guys like Marcus King, who can rip, but is actually out there dominating that blues rock scene, playing some really meaningful music. You also have guys, now mind you, this dude can play faster than anybody, but then you have dudes like Julian Lage, who are out there playing these beautifully melodic parts of songs with counterpoint. Like you listen to something like, I know
he's got so many great tunes, but Emily's the first one that comes to my mind.
Mm-hmm.
That's a slow, beautiful melody. People are going to see that his career is performing and recording music. The Instagram guys are showing how hard they dominate guitar and creating an income source from that, which is a great job. That's your own small business.
Right.
But I do think fundamentally they're very different. And over time, one will lead to musical growth, other will lead to freedom.
Yeah, you're talking about, it's like a different plane of existence. We're not talking about job income, what you're talking about, sort of, I don't know, for lack of a better word, sort of a spiritual journey level or whatever, right?
Well, it's like if you take a performer like any of these guys, like a Julian Lage or a lot of Hexelman or any of these people in that thing, their whole thing is developing their musical sense and in the fullest regard, and then whatever happens because of that is like their source of income. Whereas, like, say these Instagram guitar players that are like, this is what I'm really good at, I'm going to capitalize, I'm going to continue to improve, they're going to continually improve their income stream, which will lead to like freedom of time, freedom of mobility, freedom of finance, which I imagine most of those cats will have really dope bands and albums come out eventually because their stuff will be auto-generated, and they'll be like, all right, cool, I've got some time now. I don't need to constantly be doing videos, constantly be doing lesson packages. I have a website with 35 different lessons for sale. Let me finish writing this song I wanted to and put a band together and play.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I guess I should amend what I said before. There are absolutely some incredible artists who aren't just the flashy style that are amazing. And they are, I think that's almost the rule, though, is that they are that good and they are that interesting that they can actually do things that are not flashy and people like it, which is because they force themselves over that hill, which is awesome. So we're getting near the end here, man. This has been awesome. I'm sure we'll do a round two at some point. Let's end here with some goals, musical goals that you have for yourself in 2025. Come on, God, in another week and a half. Crazy. Yeah. Pull back. I know, it's crazy.
2025, here we go. So my musical goals this year are a little different. Kind of a continuation of last year, but a much more specific work outline. And that's kind of my biggest thing right now is project management for myself. I like to sleep late. I love to get up and have a cup of coffee and play my guitar for an hour. Whoops, is it an hour and a half? Whoops, do I got to go to work and I haven't done anything except, artistically explore. So this year I signed on with a group, this band Red Matter, a bunch of lovely folks, and I'm helping them. Well, I'm playing with them, first of all, but we are together writing a new batch of music and then taking that kind of onto the regional market come next summer. We have a really great team working with us. We have a really great cruise booked. I'm going to be doing the blues cruise with Joe Bonamassa and Ariel Posen and Marcus King and Little Feat and Mark Broussard and all these wonderful artists.
That's great.
So yeah, I'm really excited for that. And with that comes a lot of project management. The other project I'm working on, which I'm really stoked about because I love it for so many ways, but I'm working with my girlfriend Charlotte Roth on check her music out, by the way. She's got some beautiful stuff out there. Really talented, wonderful singer, super honest artist, beautiful human. But we're working with a 6-piece band and we're taking her tunes and writing arrangements, and they're coming out so cool. Really great instrumentation, upright, violin and banjo, my whole rig, but I'm taking a much different approach to this music than other ones. It's a lot about part writing. So we're starting to track the demos of that and hoping to start releasing some music around the spring, summer, and then I think we'll have a really exciting 2026. And with both those projects, what's really important personally for me is that creating a work schedule. I am a hand-to-mouth working musician. So in working with these projects, I can't take a lot of higher gigs this year. So I have my teaching schedule Monday through Thursday, and I'm still doing a ton of stuff with the Hot Club of Black Rock. You can catch us swinging all around the state and maybe some in New York. But in the meantime, I'm creating a workflow for 2025 where Monday morning at the studio at 9:30 until I teach at 2:45, and am scheduling pretty much every week with a workflow. So I still have some time to rest and recuperate. That's important, guys. You got to make sure you hydrate. You got to sleep enough.
Mm-hmm.
You gotta live. But keeping a really consistent workflow and allotting time to work in the creative space every day is my big personal goal for this year, to bring these projects to fruition. Also my trio, which is the third on that list, because it has to be, because it doesn't pay anything, but that's going to be, we'll do a couple gigs probably next fall, but that's going to be kicking in 2026 as well. So this year is a big
busy
investment into creative stuff. Yes.
Okay, so where can everybody find all this information if they see this recording here and they say, oh, let me check out a little Will Earley action? Where should they check you out?
Okay, if you want to check me out, you can find me on the basic socials: Instagram, Facebook. It's so old, I forgot what it was called. And my link tree right now is a great, type in my name, Will Earley, link tree, and that has links to the last EP I put out. It's got links to the video we released for Haunted live band at the Granite with Charlotte's group, Charlotte
cool.
Ruff, and the Big Drama.
Yeah, I'll put all those links. You'll send them all to me later, and I'll put them in the show notes so people could just click.
I will.
Okay,
I will
awesome.
send you those links. But right on there, that has links to the Hot Club of Black Rock. It has links to the Sound Scheme website, my own website, all that stuff. So everything's under one roof, and you can check out recordings, and through that find videos on YouTube and do a little deep diving.
Fantastic, man. Well, this was awesome. This felt like an extension of our weekly phone calls about music and gear and career and all that stuff. So I love it.
We barely talked about gear. We
have no gear this
analog versus digital section.
I can't believe we didn't do. We'll have to do that on a round two. And I want to get a bunch of people together who can argue to the death about never using tubes, always using tubes, never using analog anything, always using analog everything.
You need to have a special with like 4 people. We should all get soundboards too, so somebody could be like, this is why analog's great. I'm like, no, it's not.
I love it. All right, man. Great to talk to you. Thank you so much for hanging with me.
Tuohy, great to see you, my brother.
Everyone check out Will Earley.
Yeah.